And then licensing, huge one when it comes to ethics. Because you have to think about, are you or is your organization within legal requirements for licensing your software? Think about your computers you have in your home right now, right? If you built them yourselves, where did you get the operating system? Did you copy it from another computer? Did you download a valuation copy? Or did you go to the store and legally purchase one? Or download it from a company? Or do you use freeware or shareware? It's all on you. You have to ask yourself that own question. But if you, say, downloaded an evaluation copy of a particular operating system, let's say Microsoft, right? Let's say you go get the latest and greatest Microsoft operating system, 8.1, and your friend said, hey, I've got a disk, an extra disk, here you go, and they give it to you. Are you staying within licensing requirements? Well, you have to ask yourself that. Where did that disk come from? Came from a friend. So you need to ask your friend, did you install this copy already and use this CD key? And if they say no, then you're probably okay. But if they said, yeah, I installed it on my laptop and my dad's laptop, I've installed it a couple times, but it still works, it's still good. Well, yeah, physically it works, absolutely. Staying within legal requirements for licensing, though, you're not. You're actually breaking the law. It's a form of theft when you do that. So we need to make sure that we're staying in licensing requirements. If you need an application, if you need an operating system, go purchase it. Legally obtain that. Okay? Now there's different licensing models. They have freeware. All right, so you can go get some, like Linux distributions. Some of them are free. So you can do a search, go download some of those Linux distributions, and use them for free, right? They're in the part of the general public use. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not breaking any laws when it comes to that. You may have shareware, right? Somebody creates something and they put it on the web to be shared. Now, freeware doesn't usually carry much support. Shareware doesn't usually carry much support either. Not like if you went and bought a copy, a legit copy of an operating system. But shareware is like I could create something and I put it on the web to share. People could give me feedback, could maybe contribute to it to themselves. All right? It depends on how you have it licensed. If it's under the GNU or the general licensing practices there, where everybody has, it's open source, right? Where everybody has access to the source, the way it was created. Shareware, you're not necessarily giving them the source, but you're letting them use the program however. And, maybe you're asking for donations. And be like, hey, if you like my programs, sometimes you'll see like a donate button on a forum or on a website. And they can click on that and donate to the cause, if you will, for whatever. We also have commercial licensing and academic licensing. Now, commercial licensing, you're going to think of like enterprise level systems. You may hear of like an enterprise site license, where they may have 10,000 computers and they need operating systems on every one of those computers. But instead of buying an individual license for 10,000 computers, where some administrator or security professional, or it could be the internal auditor that we talked about, keeps up with the licensing for 10,000 different systems, maybe you get a site license. And you say, well, we'll buy 10,000 licenses, and they'll just send you a list. Or you could load this on a particular server as well, where it ties back to the server to keep you in compliance. It says, well, you've got 10,000 licenses, you've installed it once. You've installed it twice, 3 times. So now we only have 9,997 licenses left for whatever systems that we have available in our organization. Somebody has to keep up with that. Now, I said that you could have a server that takes care of that. There's mechanisms out there. So back to our example, I'm not pushing one operating system over another, but just to put it into some context. Let's say I own an enterprise and I get 10,000 Microsoft licenses for an operating system. I can use a program like SCCM through Microsoft that actually helps me with my licensing. It will go out and see what licenses are installed on which systems, who's using those licenses and how many I'm using, and let me know if I'm staying in compliance or not, if I'm meeting the regulations, if I'm meeting our SLA, our service level agreement between my corporation and Microsoft. Because I told Microsoft I'm only going to use 10,000 and I've only paid for 10,000. So that's all I need to use. There's no, Microsoft doesn't physically come and check and say, well, you used 10,001, give us another $100. They don't do that. It's an agreement, and that can move on, right? But we can put servers, mechanisms in place that enforce that policy, again, to protect us as an organization because we want to do the right thing. You could have academic licensing as well, which is a lot like commercial licensing, except usually they get some type of discount because we want to take care of our academic community, right? We want students to learn. We want them to grow. So companies, for applications, operating systems, for all kind of stuff, they can have academic licensing, and they kind of give them a little discount, right? They may give students a very heavy discount on particular applications so they can use that application in school to better further their education and become more educated and hopefully become security professionals, right? Now, another thing we need to talk about is the import and export controls. Now, the government understood early on how powerful computers are going to be. And what they did is adopted laws to prevent the exporting of systems to other countries that could possibly pose a threat to the United States. And when I say early on, back in the 70s, they came up with these laws, these ideas that they said, around the Cold War era, where they thought, we can't let this technology, we can't let this just run rampant. It may be used against us, and we don't want that, right? We're trying to protect our own country. So they came up with the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR, and it says, it looks at the item and says, what is a defense item and what can be done with that particular item. And if it meets that, if it says, well, that's part of a defense item for the United States of America in this case, it cannot be exported. There's countries that we can't send that to. This is a presidential decision. It is an executive type decision on what goes on this list. We also have the Export Administration Regulations, the EAR. Now, this regulates exports of civilian goods and technologies, which could be equipment, software, technology, materials, and data, and maybe even the know-how, like training materials, that could have military applications. So you look at these technologies, this equipment and software and know-how, to see if that could be exported out to specific countries in the world. Again, this is an executive decision. It's a presidential decision on what's on this list, what falls under this regulation. So you could create a training video, and you may not be able to sell it, export it, get it to other countries that could pose a threat to the United States. So a couple different regulations there, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations and the Export Administration Regulations. We also have something called the Trans-Border Data Flow. Now, if you think about borders and data, we're moving data across borders, and we're talking about international borders in this case. So we're moving data between country borders from, say, server to server. And there's a lot of things you have to think about when you do that, because some countries, have more regulations, more laws than other countries. Some have less, and that could be the reason for the data flows. So you have to think about who has regulation jurisdiction. So which laws do we even have to follow? Let's say the data originated in Canada, but it flows and gets stored somewhere in Europe. Do we follow the laws, the Canadian laws for that data? Because it originated there. The company that owns the data is there, but the data itself is now being hosted or stored in a country in Europe. So do we follow their laws and their regulations? Country laws where the data is stored or where the country that owning the company resides with. That's what we have to think about. Which laws do we follow? Now, also with this border data flow, is you have to think of the tons and tons of information being collected from the web, search engines, RFID chips, right? Those frequency chips. We are being scanned, monitored, regulated all the time. You ever jumped on the web and started searching and it's like it could read your mind? Or be going somewhere on your phone and it pops up and says, hey, this is a popular restaurant in this area. Because you're being tracked. And yes, I know we can go in and turn some of these services off and turn off some of these devices. Most people don't do that. Most people don't know how to do that. So we have to think about all this information. Where is it being stored? Is it being moved from country to country? Is it being stored somewhere else? And when it is, again, what regulations do we follow? Who's responsible for all of that data? Now, all this tons of data that we collect could be used to fight cyber terrorism, right? They scrub through the data, they say, to look for keywords, specific phrases, things that could be used with malicious intent. And you see this on the news all the time. You know, the FBI did this, the CIA stopped this attack. You know, they thwarted this attack in the United Kingdom because of surveillance, right, on all that information they're collecting. That could be a discussion on its own. I've had discussions with other security professionals and folks in general just thinking about privacy and rights when it comes to all this tons of information that's been collected and what they're doing with it. So everybody's got their opinions on this. There are laws coming. They're working on them right now, actually. But most of this information could be used to fight cyber terrorism, and hopefully they're not just poking around in our privacy, right? So let's talk about privacy. When we talk about privacy, we need to think about PII, personal identifiable information. This is information about you, or me, or him, or her, but it belongs to specific individuals. You have to protect this information. I'm sure you've heard of identity theft before, right? There's been multiple movies about it. You hear about it. There's companies out there that say they protect your identity. They will help you with identity theft. But you can protect yourself as well. Don't share too much information, for one. And I'm not talking about, when we were talking about the data flow over the borders, that's more of a governmental. I'm talking about private companies now, or people with malicious intent. Things like your social security number, your phone number, your bank account numbers, your address, your kids' names, your date of birth, your blood type. That's all PII. That's stuff about you that really shouldn't pertain to anybody else. Yeah, you might share your birthday with somebody else and you might share a blood type with somebody else. But when I start getting these pieces of information, if I was to be a malicious attacker or a hacker, I can get a little piece here and a little piece here and a little piece. I can start making a bigger picture now. I don't need to, if I can't get it all at once, that's fine. I'll wait. I can bide my time and get your blood type. Then I'll get your date of birth. Then I'll get your kids' names. Then I'll start working on them. And it's a vicious cycle. But that's information that we all have to protect. Now, privacy can be defined as the rights and obligations of individuals and organizations with respect to the collection of how they're getting this information, this tons of data we talked about, how they're going to use that data, and how they're going to retain and disclose of this personal information. And we see this all the time when we sign up for stuff on websites, banking, shopping, what they're going to do with our data, what they can't do with our data. And they say, read our privacy policy, and they want you to click on that. How many of you click on that? Yep, probably not very many, right? Because we are moving on, right? We got things to do. We got bridges, to build and fires to put out and all kind of stuff. So we click, I agree, hit submit, just give me the data that I want. But you probably want to read that privacy policy because that tells you what they can do with your information because you just put your information in there. And it may just be your name and email address, but that's still PII. That's stuff that belongs to you. Now, personal information could be a rather generic concept and encompasses any information that's about any identifiable individual. So when I say personal information, that's what I'm talking about. It's just anything that belongs to you that could help me as an attacker or malicious user identify you as somebody that I want to come after. It's like, well, that's his name. Well, that's his email address. So now I'm going to do a search on your email address to find out other information about you, see what other PII I can get. Now, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, they've kind of broadly classified principles into the collection limitation, the data quality, the purpose of why you're collecting that data, the purpose specification, use limitation of what they can do with all of this data. You know, can they sell it and make money off your data? Can they use it to targeted ads where they know you like to do A, B, and C? So they're going to send you spam, right? They're going to send you ads because it looks like you like to go camping. And I know when your birthday is, so when your birthday gets close, I'm going to send you some specials for camping equipment or camping gear. I have to think, they also had principles for security safeguards, openness, who you can share this with, individual participation, and accountability on the corporations or the organization side. You know, they lose this information, right? You hear about corporations and companies all the time now getting hacked, right? Or somebody has attacked this and there's been a data breach. Well, who's accountable for all that information, right? They've collected tons of information about you. If your employer was to get hacked right now, what information does your employer know about you? A lot, right? Now you know your first name, your last name, your middle name, your social security number, your phone number, 2 phone numbers, your physical address. They may know your spouse. They may know your kids' names. They may know your spouse's contact information. They may know your last 3 employers and your last 3 bosses' names, where you work, the addresses, the phone numbers for those companies, how much money you possibly made, what your job responsibilities are in that company. So now, with a targeted attack, I've got lots of information about you. I know your skill set. I know how smart you are when it comes to IT, or vice versa. I know where you live. I'm sure you've heard of Google Maps before. You can take somebody's address, throw it into Google Maps, and almost get a picture of their house. So now I even know what your house looks like. Pretty serious stuff when it comes to privacy, because all you need is some little pieces, and you can start putting the puzzle together. And eventually you get enough pieces of the puzzle, and you get the whole picture, right? And now you can be, the victim to identity theft or identity fraud, other attacks, things like that. So privacy is super important when it comes to being a security professional or security manager for an organization. So just a second ago, I talked about data breaches. Just to reiterate that a little bit, a data breach is an incident, a computer incident. Now, incident, by the way, is anything that happens on a computer. It could be bad, could be good. Something has happened. A data breach is an incident, though, that results in the disclosure or potential exposure of data. And it could be PII, could be credit card numbers, which is still kind of like PII, but it's a little different if we can't tie that back. Credit card numbers, social security numbers, the good stuff, right? The stuff that hackers are trying to go for because that's how they're going to make money. Now, we hear about these all the time, quarterly, if not monthly, weekly. It happens all the time. Like, a major Target, right? They had a big breach. Home Depot's had them. eBay, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, the Veterans Affairs. These all have had some type of data breaches where they've been hacked, right? Somebody has taken information out of these companies, out of these organizations for whatever reason, right? Just to be malicious, to sell it for data fraud or identity fraud, identity theft, right? Because again, these companies know a lot about you. They know your shopping patterns, for example. They know your name. They know your address. They have contact information. They may not know your phone number, but they have an email address. And again, it only takes hackers pieces, right? They just need to grab pieces from here and there and start putting the puzzle together until they can get a whole picture of what's going on. So coming up, next we're going to continue on with Domain 1, starting off with understanding the professional ethics.